Hey, what's going on, y'all? Eric Muldrow here once again with Code Red Conversations. Thanks for joining me. My goal today isn't to keep you too long, but there are a few things I'd like to discuss on our primary topic. Is white supremacy truly the biggest terror threat here in the United States? That's a claim that was made by, I think, the head of Homeland Security. We're going to share a couple of articles where he made that claim. But we're going to examine those numbers, and then we're going to look at some other factors that may impact their determining whether that is true or not. So let's dive in here, shall we? Let's jump right in with the very first article here. If you guys have any ideas, any thoughts on your mind regarding this topic, make sure you comment down below. So this is a Huffington Post article. Yes, where it says white supremacists are the biggest domestic terrorism threat. Top Biden official says. It's from 2021. I'll read some of it. White supremacy is the greatest domestic terrorism threat facing the United States, the Biden administration's top law enforcement officials told lawmakers on Wednesday. The comments were made by Attorney General Merrick Garland, of course, and Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas during a hearing before the Senate Appropriations Committee about the rise of domestic extremism. The hearing largely focused on, of course, the deadly, yeah, it was deadly, all right, but may not be in the way that they make it out to be. Because as far as I know, there was only one person who was killed that day, primarily related to the actual incident. And that was one female who was shot by one of the police officers there. I think it was a Capitol police officer. Anyway, let's proceed. As the U.S. Capitol, as supporters of the then President Donald Trump stormed the halls of Congress in an attempt to disrupt the certification of the Electoral College vote. Quote, domestic violent extremists pose an elevated threat in 2021. And in the FBI's view, the top domestic violence extremist threat we face comes from racially or ethnically, keep that in mind, y'all, comes from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race. Garland told lawmakers, saying the Biden administration was dedicated to increasing resources to combating the threat. We're going to look at some of those numbers. And then, again, we're going to examine some other information that may throw a bit of a wrench in their perspective, their data. The hearing came at the same time as former Trump officials' testimony before the House lawmakers in the Capitol about the Capitol riot. Republicans on the Senate committee, however, rejected Garland's argument and accused the Democrats of seeking to politicize any investigation into the January 6th attack. Of course, yeah, we know, of course, they would never do such a thing. The GOP has largely stood steadfast behind Trump, even after he was impeached in the House for his role in inciting the violence. Now, that's just silly, honestly. There was such a claim. There were so many claims made about him allegedly inciting violence. But the day before, he spoke about peace. The day of, during his speech, he spoke about go forward and peacefully let your voice be heard. There were so many allegations of it, but if you actually listen to what the man says, there was no incitement to violence, none that I heard. And I actually listened to the entire speech. And then he actually told them later on, after, all the foolishness had taken place, to go home. Anyway, and the House GOP elected rep at the time, she's no longer there now, from her leadership, they checked from her leadership position on Wednesday after she refused to back up the president's lies. They say they're so adamant about this, carrying on with this perspective that this election was the safest in U.S. history. They will stand by that forever, and of course they will, because if you're not on the right political side, your voice you'll be called a conspiracy theorist. But so many times in our past, in our country's past, if you made claims about the election being stolen, like Hillary Clinton did 100 times, so many times where Kamala Harris made statements, so many times where Elizabeth Warren made statements, so many. I mean, I can go on and on with people. I think it was John Lewis made statements about Trump being a illegitimate president, but no one ever called them conspiracy theorists or there was never a time where you were removed from social media for making that claim. It is only if you are on the political right. That's the only time where you'll ever face any kind of consequences for believing the election to be stolen. Kind of odd how that happens. But anyway, let's continue. Senator Richard Shelby asked if the Justice Department had ignored other racial justice protests against police brutality last year, and he levied blame on the Republicans unfairly. And had levied blame on the Republicans unfairly. Democrats would have the American people believing that all domestic violence extremists are far-right supremacists and that all Republicans are complicit to their actions, Shelby said. The Attorney General disputed this characterization. We don't care what the ideology is. Violations of law are pursued and prosecuted. Pay attention to this, y'all. Garland replied. I think it's fair to say that in my career as a judge and in law enforcement, I have not seen a more dangerous threat to democracy than the invasion of the Capitol. Very interesting. He later added that the quote-unquote insurrection was a, quote, an attempt, I quote, put in quotations, was an attempt to interfere with the fundamental elements of democracy, a peaceful transfer of power. More than 430 people have been arrested for their role in the insurrection, Garland said Wednesday. All right. So we have that. Stop sharing that right now. So we have what he said. So I pulled up some additional information from, I believe it's from 2020 or 2021, regarding this very information, some of this very information, what the FBI hate crime report actually said. So let's pull that up and let's dig into it a bit. Not going to read the entire thing, but we'll read some of it. We'll read some of the main meat of it from 2021. This is a supplemental report. The 2021 supplemental report included hate crimes data from an additional 3,025 law enforcement agencies. Overall, law enforcement agencies reported 10,840 total incidents and 12,822 victims. Nationally, reported hate crimes incidents increased by 11.6% from roughly 8,200 in 2020 to 9,065 in 2021. This data reflects the reports of 14,859 law enforcement agencies representing 91% of the U.S. population. So we have a lot of agencies reporting this information. And he said we're looking at, what was it? What's the total number? 10,840, roughly. And if you look at nationwide, if that's the number, or maybe that doesn't include the addition, well, yeah. Total incidents and 10,840. And if you look at those numbers, and when you look at nationwide here in our country, and I hope that's the actual number. I want to make sure that I'm quoting that properly. I don't want to give anybody any false data. But if you look at that number, those numbers, when you look at our entire nation, a population of 340 million, that's really not that big of, that's really not that large of a figure. So let's look at the breakdown if we can. I'm not sure if it's on this form here. It might be on the other. I'll pull that one up. According to this year's data, this is from 2021, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 2021. 63.1% of single bias incidents were motivated by offenders' bias towards race or ethnicity, which continues to be the largest motivating category. Anti-Black or anti-African American hate continues to be the largest bias incident category, with 31.1% of all single bias incidents in 2021. Additionally, anti-Asian incidents represent 7.1%. And I wonder how legit that is, because we know there's a lot of hate crime that go against Asians out there. But all right, let's continue. Together, incidents related to sexual orientation, gender identity represent about 20.4% of all single bias incidents reported in 2022. Also, incidents related to religion were 15.1% of incidents, and those related to disability were 1.4. Okay, here we go. A total of 1,590 incidents related to religion were reported. The largest category of religion include anti-Jewish, 51.4%, anti-Sikh, 11.6%, anti-Islamic, 9.6%, anti-Catholic, 6.1%, anti-Eastern Orthodox. I find it odd that there's no anti-Christian in particular category. Like, it wasn't even listed there. I find that to be very strange. Because we know internationally speaking, worldwide, Christians are the most persecuted group. So, maybe that's the numbers that they came across. I don't want to assume automatically that they're not being truthful, but it makes me wonder a bit. It does cause me to wonder a tad. So let's check out some additional information here. Okay, I pulled up this one here. All right, I think this is it. Oh, this is from 2017. And actually, that was the source that they discussed. If I'm not mistaken, that was the actual source material that was referenced when this report initially came out. Let me delete what I had here so I don't pull up the same information twice. Once again, I appreciate y'all for joining me. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this one. And I'll pull up this additional one here. There we go. Let's go over this one here a bit. Shrink down my head. Okay. Yeah, this is from 2021. Victims of hate crime incidents is what we're looking at. Over 10,500 single bias incidents involving 12,000. Yes, this is basically the same information, but it's a little broken down a little in more simple terms, or a simple presentation. Again, it says 64.5% were based on individuals' ethnicity, the vast majority. Of the 8,327 hate crime offense classified, or crime offenses classified as crimes against persons in the 2021 updated database, 43.2% were intimidation. So the vast majority were intimidation. And I wonder how that's defined federally. Is that someone just talking crap? That's what I wonder. Like, what are the actual elements of that crime? Because that's a big deal. 35.5% is a big deal in helping us to decipher this information. Is it truly the issue that they make it out to be? Because personally, I'm under the impression that this is another seed planted with political motivations in mind. 35.5% were simple assaults. And again, what's the actual definition? I know different jurisdictions, different cities, different states have different ways of defining assault. Here in Nevada, assault is placing someone under fear or apprehension of immediate bodily harm. You don't actually hit them, but you make them concerned for their safety that you might hit them. It's like basically threatening. So I wonder how it's viewed federally. 20.1% was aggravated assault. There were 19 rapes and 18 murders reported as hate crimes. The remaining 70 hate crime offenses classified as crimes against persons were reported in categories of other. Now I wonder what that is, because we're hearing, and I'm wondering if they even categorize based on political ideology, things like that, because I don't see that being mentioned anywhere. Of the 3,817 hate crime offenses classified as crimes against property, 71.2 were acts of destruction, damage, or vandalism. 267 additional offenses were classified as crimes against society. This crime category represents society's prohibitions against engaging in certain types of activities such as gambling, prostitution, and drug violations. These are typically victimless crimes in which property is not the object. That's weird. How would you categorize that as a hate crime? Engaging gambling, prostitution, drug violations is really odd. Anyway, but that's what we know so far. That's what we have so far. So the question is this true? Is this legitimate? And let me pull up another article to see if this is examined completely. Because I found another article. What's up, Clayton? Attacks on churches haven't been reported. Right. I wonder to what degree do they actually, because it wasn't even brought up. The fact that churches were attacked wasn't even mentioned. So for me, it calls into question the entire survey. Maybe not the entire survey, but I would say a large portion of it would be called into question. If you totally ignore a whole group, keep that in mind. If you totally ignore an entire group, how thorough is your examination? So with that in mind, let's check out some additional information. Look at this article here. This is from townhall.com. And this article says the FBI admits it doesn't track leftist violence. Now we're going to dig into the article to get to the main gist of what they're saying here. During the misnamed Summer of Love, and I totally agree, because it wasn't a whole lot of love going on at that time. Riots, looting, vandalism, and political violence was carried out by radical leftists under the often literal Antifa and BLM banners. The violent leftists besieged federal property, private businesses, law enforcement, and private citizens with costly, deadly, and devastating outcomes. Now, I wonder to what degree, if at all, again, when did this article come out? About this are May 21, the Huffington Post article I initially read, and there's one I'm reading right now from Town Hall's October 2021. And of course, the quote unquote summer of love was 2020. The first thing I'll ask is, was the violence here that took place over the summer for 6 months, was the violence here factored into their determination as to what went down, what made them, as far as they're figuring which group is responsible for the most violence? Because I would be under the impression that they wouldn't. And you might ask? Well, you had a lot of politicians who were encouraging the violence that took place. There were plenty of politicians. Kamala Harris encouraged these people to riot. Maxine Waters encouraged these people to continue with their violence. There were a lot of folks in positions of power who did not seek an end because they knew ultimately that it would benefit them politically. So they didn't say anything. They didn't say anything at all, but they encouraged people to violence, to continue with their violence. And as far as I can see, nothing ever happened to them. Nothing ever happened to them whatsoever, which again demonstrates the extreme double standard that we see politically. It's totally nuts. All right, let's continue. Joe Biden and other Democrats turned a blind eye to the violence for political reasons in a stunning show of hypocritical double standard. My goodness. Basically, exactly what I said. In too many cases, Democrats even encourage more leftist violence. As it turns out, the FBI turned a blind eye to those carrying out the riots and looting too. And that's basically what we see now. And we're finding out more and more. We found that out earlier in the year, late last year, with the Twitter files, finding out the deep connections between the social media companies and the intel organizations, FBI, Homeland Security. Their deep ties to what's going on politically, and them leaning primarily one way. In a congressional hearing last week titled Confronting White Supremacy, Part 5, examining the Biden administration's counterterrorism strategy, FBI Assistant Director of Counterterrorism, Timothy Langan, said that the Bureau doesn't consider Antifa to be an organization, and as such does not have specific information on the group's activity. But what gets me is that they have actually organized. They are extremely organized. If anyone's done even an ounce of research, you will find that Antifa they have banners, they have groups of people, they communicate. That it's not some ragtag group of people who just do whatever. They are extremely organized. And Andy Ngo, he's an independent reporter. He's done extensive work on Antifa. He's written a book about them, and he suffered physical attacks from them to the point where he ultimately ended up moving out of country because of the many threats on his life. In response to questions about how much violence or domestic terrorism Antifa committed in recent years from Rep. Nancy Mace, Langan had nothing to offer. Quote, under the anti-government category or subcategory of domestic terrorism, would that include groups like Antifa, BLM, folks who commit violence or acts of domestic terrorism? Mace asked. And this was the response. Well, we don't identify groups, but individual actions, Langan responded. Okay, you don't identify groups, but individual actions, but individuals make up these groups. An individual has to make up these groups. So in order for you should quantify this and figure out what is this based on. And you will find consistently that it is based a lot of times on them pushing a political ideology or some form of social ideology, and them threatening, intimidating, harassing. How many religious groups, how many conservatives have been shut down due to protests, threats of violence, threats of bombings, fire bombings over the last few years, because these people don't even want to hear them talk at college campuses or wherever. So if individuals are committing actions that would be in furtherance of anti-government or anarchist ideas, then they would fall into that category. But again, they had nothing to offer when it came down to the group. But so she continued. So would you quantify Antifa as an anarchist group under then that subcategory? Mace pressed. I mean, it's an anarchist group, right? The response, the director had previously described them as a movement, and there has been individuals that have associated or identified with Antifa that have conducted violent acts that we would categorize as anarchists. Just say yes, was all Langan offered. was all Langan could offer of the mere quote unquote movement of Antifa. Mace continued, asking how many acts of violence or domestic terrorism has Antifa committed over the last 2 years? Again, Langan had nothing to offer. Since we don't recognize Antifa, nor do we calculate or collate information regarding Antifa, that movement, we don't have that, said senior FBI counterintelligence official. But we can provide you information on anarchist threats and cases in general. So they really don't have anything that really nails down what these individuals do. So when it comes to leftist extremist violence, it seems as if they don't have a ton of information. And is that based on the fact that there isn't that much? We're gonna get into that. Hang tight. How many open cases of anarchist violence and domestic terrorism have occurred over the last 2 years? Mace asked, seeking any data that might quantify any accountability for those who raised neighborhoods and federal property, especially if we're going back to 2020. Over $2 billion worth of damage nationwide, riots in over 220 cities, 24 deaths tied to that. But again, so far, here we are in 2023, and not an ounce of, and nothing has been investigated on a federal level. So we have, as far as arrest activities for the anti-government, anti-authority, we have 75 total arrests. But of course, they're not tied to any political perspective or anything like that, according to these guys. 75 out of all that damage done, all that violence, 75 arrests. Mace questioning sought answers to what many Americans wonder: how American cities could be held siege by Antifa and BLM for months while elected officials failed to address the situation. And that is the primary question. And one of the factors, before I continue, one of the main factors is anytime anyone would step up and try to intervene or say anything and speak out against it. I remember when Trump sent in federal agents to quell the violence, you had Nancy Pelosi calling them stormtroopers, his shock troops. Meanwhile, they're trying to keep these federal buildings and these communities from being destroyed, being burned down. It's absolutely insane. Double standard is real, y'all. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The double standard is real. There was no concern for Wuhan. There was no concern for the Wuhan coronavirus as massive maskless crowds took to city streets and few arrests or charges filed by Democrat district attorneys for those who vandalized and burned businesses or government property. Yeah, that was another thing. You had DAs letting these people out. You had celebrities, other politicians gathering money, gathering funds to get these people out. Liberal mayors allowed so-called autonomous zones to become festering pits of crime and filth. And now it turns out that the nation's top law enforcement agencies doesn't even have numbers on Antifa violence, or BLM for that matter, and apparently arrested fewer than 100 people for engaging in anti-government activity. Pretty crazy. I'm not shocked by it, nor should you be, honestly. Considering all the insanity we've seen over the years, I don't think this will shock any of us. But it's just a sad state of affairs is where we are as a nation, honestly. Now, most of us out here are pretty reasonable people, and we know that something ain't right with this whole situation. These things aren't right. So let's just take a quick glance through. Again, I don't plan on keeping you here too long. But let's just take a quick glance through. If we all just think back, we can recall how bad things were. But I have a couple of lists here that might be able to help us out a bit. as we take a look and try to take an unbiased peek into left-wing extremism. Just a taste, not a lot, just a taste. So if you don't track, if you actually don't have a means to track this information, of course you won't be able to determine whether these people are an actual threat or not. And again, it throws a cog in the entire foundation, what you claim to be legit. This is from Grabian.com. I'm not sure of the website, but it tracks left-wing political violence. And this goes back to June of 2016. And so far, what they put together were 179 different incidents. I'll just read a couple. Bloody scene in San Jose as protesters. And there are articles that are linked. And what I'll do is I'll actually tag this in the description, this website, this page I'm on right now. So you can take your time and browse through, because I'm not going to go through every one of them. But you have some from various news sources, national newspapers, local news outlets that track over 179. Here are a couple of examples. Bloody scene in San Jose as protesters attack Trump supporters. That was from the Washington Post on June 3rd. Police, Clinton supporter lights flag on fire, attacks Trump supporter. There was a lot of that going on. And these people felt truly justified because they were constantly told how this man was Hitler. That was a constant claim. All right, let's go more recent. Let's go to 2022. Dave Chappelle attacked on stage. The guy was politically motivated. We all remember that one, at least most of us. Pregnancy help director says onward after pro-abortion attacks over Dobb leak. And not to mention the fact that Brett Kavanaugh, you had people protesting on the streets. No one said anything about that. No one told him to get off the street. You had someone who actually was found with rope and things like that because he planned on kidnapping Brett Kavanaugh. So I guess they don't take the time to categorize or track violence coming from leftist political extremists. What else? Across the nation, pro-life groups and pregnancy centers report attacks from the Daily Wire. Right here. The Supreme Court leak was an unplanned complication for pregnancy centers from Christianity Today. Molotov cocktail thrown at Oregon Right to Life building. Kaiser police investigating. Pro-life women's groups say leftists vandalized, urinated on their office. Now, imagine for a second, just imagine with me for a few moments. Now, just imagine if this happened, if this were attacks on the NAACP office, or if this were attacks on GLAAD, Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Just imagine if these attacks were on towards these different groups. This information would be all over the news. But how many of us heard this on our local news? Now, many of us who are watching this, we may seek out consistently more conservative or Christian news sources. So we may be privy to this information. But the average everyday citizen who just goes home and watches the alphabet news channels, ABC, NBC, CBS, or CNN or MSNBC, you will never hear this information. Or if you hear it, you'll hear it through the lens of, well, these people knew what they were doing. They knew that trying to stop a woman's right to choose would cause violence, and it would ultimately put the blame on them. Everything we heard with the Nashville shooting of the Christian school, it was spun in a way to what somehow in the midst of this entire situation, you had the media, you had the White House making the trans community out to be the victim. Totally insane. All right, let me see here. His nesting place on Facebook, I got it highlighted here in red. A home for mothers and children. I guess they had some kind of attack. The things you can't compromise on as a Catholic vicar. Parishioner responds to vandalism at women's clinic in Auburn. So you have pages, nearly hundreds, nearly 200 different acts of violence that were committed against Christian organizations or organizations that had a more conservative perspective. This last one here, we all remember this. Dozens of far left at the bottom here. Dozens of I can't pull the highlight that. Dozens of far left activists arrested after firebombing Atlanta Police Training Center. How you ignore that? How you ignore that is beyond me. How you ignore that is completely beyond me. It demonstrates that you don't want to know. You don't want to know these facts. You want another narrative to be known, to be heard. But you don't want a narrative that would demonstrate that anybody from your political perspective would have the potential to be violent. Let me share another article with you here. Now, we already mentioned Brett Kavanaugh, what happened to him. Here's some more information about pro-life groups. After the Dobbs decision came down, we all know what went down, how that was received. People acting, we all knew it. I called it. I called it days before. I said, watch how violent these people act. And man, they didn't let me down. Well, look at the headline here. More than 100 pro-life organizations, churches attacked since the Dobbs leak. More than 100. I'll read a little snippet of the article. Again, more than 100 pregnancy centers, pro-life organizations, and churches have been attacked, some more than once, since the May 2nd leak of the Supreme Court draft opinion in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which overturned Roe v. Wade. And it's funny how we have no idea, quote unquote, no idea who was involved in the leak, who leaked the information. Fox News Digital previously reported that while more than a dozen attacks have been claimed by left-wing pro-abortion group Jane's Revenge, not a single member of the underground group has been arrested as of when this article was posted. According to a list updated this month by the Family Research Council, a Christian nonprofit, at least 38 churches across the country have been firebombed, smashed, ransacked, or vandalized with pro-abortion graffiti and threatening messages since the May 2nd leak. Isn't that just nuts, honestly? Just think about that. These people are so hell-bent, excuse my language, so hell-bent on killing their children that they're willing to lash out in violence. And they think that what they're doing is a good thing. Man, if that's not Isaiah where he says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. If that's not where we are, if that's not Romans chapter 1, basically God giving people over to the depravity in their mind, I don't know what is. We're truly in a pretty sad place as a society. As we continue, at least 58 other pro-life clinics and organizations suffered the same fate, according to the same report. So I noticed that information wasn't mentioned in this data, this research from the FBI and Homeland Security Director. Maybe it's just a coincidence. What do y'all think? I think we all know better, sadly. All right. Let's check out this one here. One more. As I share the screen. And this one was posted this was in 2020. What month? November 2020. "74 times leftist protesters engaged in violence or destruction in the past 30 days. When this article came out in November, this was only 30 days worth of information. And again, I won't read the entire article, but this is from Breitbart. I'll just read a handful of them. One, protesters arrested in assault of Black conservative rally organization. Now, why would you assault a Black conservative rally organization? And I wonder, would this have been factored into the anti-Black violence? I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be, but maybe it's a possibility, I guess. Number two, 14 DC police officers arrested during Wednesday riots. One lost eyesight. Rioters in Washington, D.C. injured 14 police officers in the chaos that ensued during the city's second night of protests over the death of Karen Hilton. The injuries included one officer losing eyesight after being targeted with a laser. Wow. Yeah, that was going on a lot in 2020. 3, rioters moved from businesses to residential streets in Portland. And Portland's a mess, still is. Rioters quickly moved from a business district in Northeast Portland onto residential streets after police declared a riot condition. Anti-capitalist, anti-police rioters marched through a neighborhood, overturning trash cans and shouting at residents. Number 4, Antifa protesters scream at police, "I hope all of your children get raped and killed." Antifa protesters in New York City went off on police after being ordered to disperse. One woman screamed, "I hope all of your children get raped and killed." And again, the total is, in 1 month, what was it, 79? 74. Now, what do you think, y'all? Do you think this type of information was reported in Merrick Garland and the FBI's their investigation, or do you think it was basically ignored? And if you believe it was ignored, why would you think so? I'm pretty sure the answer is simple. I've been talking about it the entire stream. The information was ignored primarily because it doesn't fit the political agenda that these people are trying to promote. They want to promote an agenda that demonstrates that the extremism, the extreme violent acts only come from the right, those on the right. The people on the political left, they don't feel that way. That's what they want you to believe. That's what they want the general public to believe. And if you can frame it in a way to where the general public believes that these people are violent, that's why the need for the constant reference to January 6th of 2020 or 2021, then you'll understand a lot of what they do. If you can look at these people, what would cause them to want to be so violent? That's the allegation. Then you'll be like, you don't want these people in positions of power, especially if you're someone who's like an independent or someone who may lean more left. But the reality is that history shows that this information is extremely questionable at best. Everything we've seen, all the violence from 2020, that was basically ignored, celebrated. Now, think about it. You had loads of bricks showing up in different locations, just being left there. Somebody had to fund that. That had to come from somewhere. So I hope and pray that this information is revealed. I think that these people are going to have a rude awakening. If they're not held accountable for the evil actions that they contributed to or they actually conducted, they'll ultimately have to stand before God and give an account. There's no getting around that. The eternal judge, unless they repent, they will have to give an account for the evil that they did. And I pray that they do. I don't want someone just to be punished because I don't agree with them politically. I pray that they repent of their sin and they have a truly transformed heart and mind. But if not, I truly feel for them. I truly feel for them because I don't want to have to face God's wrath. And some of these folks may. But overall, I'd love to know what you guys think about this. Like, what are your thoughts on this? So make sure that you comment down below. Again, I plan on posting a lot of these links in the description. Stay tuned to my channel, y'all. I'll be putting out some more consistent content. I think I've been trying to stay on point over the last week or two. And I appreciate all y'all who have been following me, watching my videos, sharing my content. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so. If you appreciate videos where someone discusses the current political climate from a biblically conservative perspective, make sure you give me a subscribe. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Share my content if you can. Help me beat this YouTube algorithm. And I'll continue to work on putting out quality content, having some deep discussions, some shorts. This will get your mind thinking. So if you haven't done so yet, make sure you give me a subscribe. I think you'll appreciate the ride. And I'm really digging in to be dedicated to making consistent content. But as always, thanks again for joining me. In the meantime, stay safe, God bless, and make sure you join the conversation. Take care.